Now, in the last hour, Canada's top minister for trade talks welcomed a Mexican trade delegation to Toronto. Dominic LeBlanc, along with Mexico's economy minister, talked up the opportunities as well as some collaborations already bearing fruit. So joining me now from Ottawa to talk more about this is the CBC's Janice McGregor. So Janice, many meetings, hundreds of meetings in Toronto and Montreal between business people on this trip. Canada and Mexico have been trading partners for years, but there's something really pushing them to get closer now.
Yeah, you're not going to win a trade war without allies, right? The business community in Canada and Mexico have a common problem. Their closest neighbor, their top trading partner, has turned inward, has put up barriers, literally and figuratively. And so they need to look elsewhere. They need to diversify. They need a ground game if they are going to be victorious in this. And how do you do that? Well, a lot of it has to do with networking. Yes, you can have politicians that negotiate favorable trade deals and put all sorts of economic strategies in place, but nothing really happens unless the businesses involved use these opportunities. And so this is a chance for the government as a facilitator to basically hook people up. This is happening on two levels. For small, medium-sized businesses who may not have contacts, these trade missions can set them up, literally. And the list of sectors that are represented with these business leaders is long. Pharmaceuticals, transportation, agri-food, but also cultural industries, tech industries, a lot of things about the services economy, even education represented in terms of the Mexicans who are in Canada now. And then when you think of the very high-level meetings, you think of some of the big names that are already heavily involved in investing in Mexico. Scotiabank, TC Energy, a lot of transportation companies, Bombardier, CN Rail, Air Canada, all of them having top-to-top kind of level meetings here too. Leading the cheerleading for this deeper relationship push, the two ministers themselves, who, as you say, just spoke last hour.
CUSMA or TMAC or USMCA, same agreement, three names. This has underpinned our shared prosperity and created a platform for businesses, such as the ones that all of you represent, to grow and expand your reach in Canada. As Canada prepares for a robust and joint review of TMAC, we're actively working, of course, with our Mexican and American partners.
Why are we here? We are looking for new opportunities. We want to work very closely with Canada, not just in this year, but the next 10, 20, or 50 years. We know that the world is changing very fastly in many ways, geopolitically, technologically, the way the economy is working on in the world.
Well, NAFTA may have started as a pitch, particularly for Canadian manufacturers to have access to the lower cost labor jurisdiction that is Mexico, of course, geographically closer than working with partners in Asia. It is now expanded to include so many more things. Ebrard himself talking about how in and of itself, this is a process. This isn't a one and done. This is a strategy that evolves in steps, the chug of international trade, the care and feeding and maintenance of these relationships. Ultimately, that is what this is all about, not sort of one particular announcement on one particular day.
Now, Janice, we also know that the two ministers held discussions over dinner last night. So is there a sense here of a strategy taking shape ahead of that CUSMA review coming up?
That's right. Speaking of things in the more immediate future, of course, that July 1st deadline when all three countries have to say whether they want to renew or not. But of course, the talk is that it might not end there, that there could be a longer term review where they continue to consider, negotiate the various irritants in the trade relationship. The Americans want to amend the current deal, not open it up, renegotiate the whole thing, but amend it with some new side letters with each country to try to fix some of the issues as the Americans see them. The Mexicans have their first official negotiating round at the end of this month, just a few weeks away now. The meetings the ministers had face-to-face last night, an opportunity to speak with some candor about strategy, perhaps, compare notes with what they're hearing from the Americans. Canada doesn't know when its official negotiations will start, but certainly keen, I think both countries are, to make sure that the Americans can't run some kind of a divide and conquer strategy, the sense that they need to stand together if they don't want the U.S. to be dominant in this conversation.
Janice, thank you for laying it all out for us. That is the CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. So now what exactly could come out of this mission? For more on that part of the story, we've reached Julian Ventura in Mexico City. He's Mexico's former Deputy Secretary of Foreign Relations and currently a senior advisor with the global advisory firm DGA Group. Julian, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be with you, Arti.
So this mission is the largest that Mexico has ever sent to Canada. How big of an opportunity is this right now for these two nations?
Well, it's an incredible opportunity. I think, first of all, it's an important sign of political commitment to follow through with the Canada-Mexico action plan that was announced by President Sheinbaum and Mark Carney last September during the Prime Minister's visit to Mexico to take meaningful steps to growing the bilateral economic relationship. The trading relationship is healthy. It's grown significantly, particularly last year, in both directions, over $60 billion in 2025. But there's a lot of room for expansion. And I think that the fact that approximately 240 Mexican companies of various sizes are participating in the mission is a clear sign of interest in the Canadian market, as we also saw in last February's Canadian trade mission to Mexico that was led by Minister LeBlanc. In all the sectors that your reporter has mentioned, pharma, electromobility, creative industries, there's a lot of potential. So all these companies are going to be meeting with counterparts. There's also going to be meetings with investment funds, with innovation clusters, representatives. And in my experience, these kinds of direct contacts are incredibly important. They're the building blocks that generate quantitative results in what should be, as Secretary Ebrard mentioned in your note, a long-term consistent effort by the two countries.
You know, you touched on, and of course we've been reporting that there's a total of 240 Mexican businesses signed up and 1,800 business-to-business meetings. Wondering how much of a shift this is, given what we've heard, of course, the geopolitical shifts and the shifts with relations with allies as well.
Well, in a very turbulent geopolitical environment, diversification is a strategic imperative for any country. Prime Minister Carney has been engaged in reaching out to trading partners around the world. Mexico has been working in the same direction. Mexico and Canada, for example, just signed on to the ministerial statement on Costa Rica's accession to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP. So those efforts are going. But in my view, in the short term, of course, the strategic imperative overwhelmingly is to stabilize our North American dimension, because it's also an important part of what makes us attractive for international partners, particularly on the investment front. And that's why we're seeing these two tracks develop along this trade mission, the direct efforts to grow an important bilateral relationship in this part of this kind of diversification push, but also to exchange notes, exchange information on how our respective bilateral dynamics are going on with Washington as we head into the USMCA review. Overwhelmingly, our exports, both Canada's and Mexico's, are concentrated in the U.S. market, over 70% of our exports in both cases. The U.S. Census Bureau just released its year-to-date figures day before yesterday, and confirming Mexico and Canada's role as the number one and number two U.S. trading partners, the number one and number two U.S. customers, and the number one and number two U.S. suppliers. So behind these huge numbers, there are millions of jobs on the line, investment decisions. So it's important to stabilize and to have a North American market that is stable, that is attractive for international investment, and that helps our own Mexican and Canadian goals to strengthen our position in this very turbulent economic environment.
Now, I wanted to ask you, you've mentioned stabilizing a few times, and that is because this relationship has been destabilized over the past several months, over the past year. I'm wondering then, does it appear like there's a strategy of trying to form a united front? We know that Mexico is going to be engaging in negotiations around the end of the month. So could there be a united front with similar objectives coming from Canada and Mexico as they begin these negotiations and these talks with the United States, who, of course, has added this extra sort of destabilizing force to the partnership?
Well, of course, our shared objective is to ensure that USMCA remains and continues to provide a strong framework of legal certainty for companies that trade in the North American space. That is a key objective. We have to preserve what is now over 85% of our trade still enters the U.S. Tariff-free, USMCA compliant trade. We have outstanding issues related to the Section 232 steel, aluminum, copper tariffs. Some of those that affect also the auto and the auto parts sector. So the objective there is to lower the floor on existing tariff rates to ensure that USMCA remains robust. There are different drivers in some cases in terms of our respective bilateral relationship with the U.S. Mexico has taken a kind of a clear the decks approach on trade irritants as we head into the review. There are some issues that the U.S. has flagged vis-a-vis the Canadian agenda. Minister LeBlanc has been to Washington recently. Canada has just announced the designation of its chief negotiator with the U.S., Janice Charette, who's an incredible public servant and negotiator. She was my colleague in London as ambassadors to the United Kingdom during the Brexit process. So here it's important to continue to maintain very intense communication between Ottawa and Mexico City on how this track is following as we head toward, Minister LeBlanc mentioned, the joint review to ensure that as we look at some of the issues that the U.S. has flagged, changes in rules of origin, extension of rules of origin to manufacturing sectors that are not there right now. How do we deal with the China dimension of our trade, given our interdependence on, for example, capital and intermediate goods from China? So all these issues are part of the Mexico-Canada agenda, and they will eventually fold in to what I hope, and I'm optimistic on this front, will be a constructive dialogue on the USMCA front, Arti.
Thank you for your time today. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave our conversation there, but I always appreciate having you on. That is Julian Ventura. He is Mexico's former Deputy Secretary of Foreign Relations. He joined us today from Mexico City.